The Lizardmen have one of the largest rosters in the game, both in battle and campaign. Their range of legendary lords are spread throughout almost the entire map, so chances are, if you're playing the game at all, you're going to run into them at some point or another. But how do you overcome this mountain of scales? Let's take a look and find out right after I thank Instant Gaming for sponsoring this video. Instant Gaming offers game keys for all your favourite stores and platforms at heavily discounted prices. Whether you want the latest and greatest or some older titles you haven't quite gotten around to yet, they have you covered at a fraction of the cost of other storefronts. Plus, with over 700,000 Trustpilot reviews and 24-hour customer service, you can sleep easy knowing you're going to get your games risk-free. If you want to pick something up or just check them out for yourself, use the link in the description and you'll not only be saving yourself some money, but also supporting the channel. One last thank you to Instant Gaming for sponsoring this video. Now, let's take a look at those lizards. Starting off as usual with the campaign, without getting into unique sub-faction mechanics, the lizards are actually a fairly simple faction to go up against. They don't really have any unique ways of summoning units outside of blessed spawnings, and they are pretty rare, so not really worth worrying about. The geomantic web sucks tremendously and doesn't do anything until much later, and even then, it doesn't really affect anyone that's attacking them. They do have a unique movement stance that makes it harder to get past them when using the underway type stances, as well as making it more difficult to ambush them, but let's be honest, this is the Warhammer 3 AI we're talking about. If it sees you, it's probably going to make a beeline for you, so it won't really bother with this. The one mechanic that I can think of that might cause you some trouble is the Rite of Primeval Glory. I'm not even 100% sure that AI can make use of this. In fact, I'm almost certain that they can't use rights, but to be honest, I needed something to put here, since otherwise we're basically skipping the campaign. If they did theoretically use this, it'd spawn them a full army of dino units, and at any stage of the game, this will provide a massive boost to their army's power. If they did manage to do this, there's not really a lot you can do to stop it, since they just perform the rite and instantly summon the units. So just be prepared with a lot of ranged and charged defense, since when this army comes at you, there's no real stopping them other than a tsunami of missile fire. Outside of mechanics, the lizards also have the classic diplomatic problem that many Warhammer races come with. They get on pretty well with other lizards, but hate literally everyone else. Their version is particularly egregious, and getting on their side will be borderline impossible without putting in some serious groundwork. This not only means that keeping them at bay diplomatically will be particularly difficult, it also means that should they decide to declare war on you, chances are all of their other lizard buddies will join them and you'll quickly be up to your neck in wars. Of course, if you declare war on them, you can use the standard join war exploit we mention every single episode, but especially in this case, it won't buy you much time. That cold-blooded diplomacy makes them very aggressive when defending their allies, and becoming allies nearly impossible even for the other order factions. If you have them as your neighbor and don't plan to fight them, try to get them on side fast and early to avoid having a much larger problem later in the game. And if you do want to fight them, also do it early. At least that way they're less likely to have allies and their later game units, both of which will make the following combat a whole lot easier. Speaking of combat, let's get into the battle, since obviously this is where the lizards have the majority of their power. They have one of the largest rosters in the game, but it for sure has strengths and weaknesses. Infantry is a strong suit. The Saurus are all extremely tough with high leadership and strong stats for defense and damage. Their armor stats are tough, and it only gets much tougher as the game goes on. Their skinks, however, are much faster and drop some toughness in exchange for maneuverability. Skinks are generally pretty easy to take down as long as you get on them fast and hit them hard. Saurus will require a lot more work, either from the frontline damage of your own or ranged units. Most of their more elite units also have shields, so getting flanks will be essential, but these are big targets, so once you have a shot, you won't really struggle to land hits. Their ranged infantry are a much smaller part of the roster, but they are still no less deadly. The main threat is the chameleons, which can sneak around constantly and fire poison missiles at you before disappearing into nothing. They're incredibly hard to pin down, but once you do get them into melee, they go down fast, so just another case of searching and you'll be fine. They do also have a small cav roster, and similar to most factions, this comes with a mix of cycle charging and sustained combat. Even with the Saurus trend, these have some pretty high armor, so even with the low defense, you'll struggle to get through without armor piercing damage. That said, they have very large hitboxes, so once they make impact, it can be very easy to pin them down. They're pretty average speed-wise and have high mass, so even with the small unit count, their charges can be pretty devastating. They even have a flying option, so nowhere is totally safe from this part of the roster. Now for the largest part by far, the beasts and monsters. They have dinosaurs of all shapes and sizes that perform all kinds of jobs, and I would say a majority of them are damn good units. You have single entities and monstrous infantry that can tear the front lines to bits, whilst also being absolute tanks with gigantic health bars and armor stats. Dinos with ancient machines strapped to their backs, allowing them to heal allied units, light out a poison fire cloud, and even call down orbital laser strikes. This is just talking about their melee monsters. We're not even onto all of their ranged options. Pterodon riders who can rain fire onto units below, salamanders that can launch explosive fireballs, stegodons that have giant ballistas and poison gatling guns. They have a huge array of options when it comes to their monsters, and all of them can be a major threat to your armies in a whole range of ways. As for the leadership of the roster, it's really more of the same. We have tanky Saurus fighters who can eventually ride carnosaurs, smaller skinks that can fly around the map or cast spells from the back of an orbital laser stegodon. They even have giant toads with enough lore of magic choices that even the Empire is looking a little bit jealous. The bottom line is, no matter what they want, they have choices, and they only get better as the game goes on. As well as all of this, the faction also has a number of traits which give their units even more of a boost. Predatory Fighter boosts the power of units that cause an enemy to flee. Primal Instincts give them a boost once they drop below 50% HP. Skinks and Crocskulls boost each other's stats just by being close to each other. A lot of their monsters can also be sent into a rampage, which can be mitigated by Lord and Hero ability. All in all, the Lizards have a massive roster, but it's mainly focused on large mass, thick armor, and high damage, mainly coming from their colossal monsters. So to build a comp to counter them, it'd go a little something like this. For the front lines, we're going to focus on charge defense or reflection versus all if possible. Their monsters will make a huge impact on the line's clash, so the more we can mitigate that, the better. We're also going to focus on defense as much as possible. Chances are you won't be able to outdamage their front line's monster combo, so the best you can do is hold them in place for as long as possible for other units to come in and deal all the real damage. If you're playing as a faction with limited ranged options, then my best advice would be to still focus on defense for your melee infantry, and then bring in some monsters with high armor piercing to bring up your damage. You'll basically be fighting them at their own game, but if you focus your damage and maybe get some flanks on the go, you should come out on top with a little bit of luck, and likely a lot more damage taken. Speaking of damage, that's where ranged infantry comes in. Against large threats, ranged infantry are simply the best option since they can launch so much damage downrange and there's basically no chance to miss. Armor piercing is absolutely the way to go, and it really doesn't matter about firing arcs since larger targets will almost always be shootable over the heads of your front lines. Sure, you might need to get some sort of an angle or climb a hill, but the damage will be leagues better even if they are a small hassle harder to use. Get them firing as constantly as possible, focusing down key targets one by one instead of spreading the love. Against the Lizards, their most deadly units will be single entities like Stegodons, Dreadsaurians, and Carnosaurs. Taking these down one at a time will remove threats one by one and slowly turn the tide in your favor instead of spreading the love and risking your lines breaking before you can take down anything. If you're down to infantry and Crocskulls, then you can get on the flanks to keep up the pressure, just keep them firing as constantly as you can. Now they may bring cav or faster flanking monsters, and for that, this is where your cav or monsters come in. Whatever you have in your faction, as long as it's fast and possibly has some armor piercing anti-large damage, use it to hunt down Lizards cav and take them out, or at the very least, prevent them from getting into your ranged troops. Your ranged units are the major damage output for your army, so protecting them at all costs will be key to success. Even if you're not playing with a ranged focus comp, protecting your flanks will keep your entire army confident and increase your chances of success by a whole lot. If they don't have any cav or you see off their roster, you can also hunt down any ranged units they have, either on the flanks or their own back lines. Well, if that is taken care of, then charging into the backs of the front lines is never a bad idea. A lot of their monsters, even those later in the game, have pretty low leadership, so charges to the rear can break them pretty fast to ensure they get no value out of very expensive units. And in all of this, if you can bring something with anti-large damage, then it will for sure go a long way since basically everything they'll go up against will be a big boy. As for leadership, anything you can bring which enhances the power of your ranged units will only let them get more value, so is always a win. It doesn't matter if it's skill points, passive auras, or active abilities, if they can improve range damage, that will have a huge impact on your battles and is well worth any price it throws at you. As well as this, a spellcaster of some sort will always come in handy. If you're wanting damage, then make sure it's armor piercing, and similarly, if you're interested in going for buffs and auras, make sure they're going to work with what you bring and what you're up against. For hexes, I'd focus on armor and damage since those are the major strengths for the majority of the Lizard roster. For buffs, again, focus on range damage output, particularly armor piercing. Shadows is always a good pick, but light would work with the ability to pin down enemies in the open for easy shots. These to slow them down and reduce melee stats. I could go on, but just get something that works with your comp and complements what it's already doing. No use increasing the melee damage when you're focusing on defending, right? I know this comp I recommend against pretty much everything, but that's because it works. You can hold them back and pick apart their major threats from a distance with the lowest risk to your army. If you're playing as a faction with limited ranged options like the Beastmen for example, my best advice would be to bring as much armor piercing anti-large damage as you can in the form of monsters and focus down those key targets by surrounding them one at a time. You'll have to brute force your way through their front lines and overwhelm them with so much damage that their beasties have no choice but to turn tail and run for the hills. You'll almost certainly take a lot more damage than the ranged army, but if you bring enough damage of your own, you should be able to eke out a victory and take out a lot of their key units with relative ease. Also, if you don't have any ranged options of your own, doubly make sure that you take out their ranged options because otherwise they're going to get free value and there's not really much you can do about it if you don't get off a flank. And that is everything that you need to know to beat the Lizardmen. Let me know if I missed anything or if you have any questions in the comments below. Like, subscribe, and if you want to know how to beat more factions, then check out this video on how to beat the Dwarves.